We have a rare event ahead with two major hurricanes and a blue supermoon at the same time. Let's take a look at Franklin, folks. This thing is a beast out there in the Atlantic. Maxed out last night at 150 mile per hour. Category 4 hurricane dropped down to 926 millibar low pressure. Luckily, this is out in the open waters of the Atlantic, but what's not out in the open waters is this feature down there into the Gulf of Mexico now that we've been highlighted on this channel for a couple of days. Now that's crossed over into the Gulf of Mexico and is now officially Hurricane Idalia. That is going to be rapidly intensifying over the next 24 hours and going to be making landfall at its peak as a category 3, possibly even a category 4 hurricane going into tomorrow on Wednesday. And at the same time, we've got a rare blue supermoon that's going to be happening tomorrow, folks. We won't actually see another supermoon like this until the year 2037. So when's the last time we've actually seen like two major hurricanes and a rare supermoon at the same time? I mean, it's almost like it happens like once in a blue moon or something. So if you are new to the channel and like detailed weather breakdowns, hit the subscribe button and you're in. You get all my daily content on this channel, and I would love to reach 200,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and you can help me get there by subscribing to the channel and follow me all my daily content. So let's take a look at the latest update on Idalia. This is now a Category 1 hurricane up to 80 miles an hour. It actually has sped up a little bit. It's now going 14 miles an hour. You can see definitely it's supposed to rapidly intensify overnight. These have a tendency to do that. And then it's going to be a major hurricane by the time you wake up in the wee hours of the morning on 1 o'clock in the morning, and likely going to be making landfall as a category 3, possibly even like maybe a category 4. The official track now takes it up to 120 miles an hour hurricane. So it's expected to increase at least 40 miles an hour over the next 24 hours. And what it's got going for itself is this, folks. It's got a lot of heat in the Gulf of Mexico, exactly where it's going. If it's going over that loop eddy, unfortunately, it's going over the same terrain that like Hurricane Michael went over. This area in the Gulf is on fire. It's got some of the warmest temperatures they've ever seen for this time of year. This waters are untouched. So this is why the main concern is this is supposed to rapidly intensify overnight, and there's definitely some model guidance that's still hinting at it could actually even peak out as maybe a category 4 hurricane. So the latest update on the storm surge continues to ramp up, folks. Now, one of the things that's happening because of the forward speed, and it's actually going in faster, it's not going to be picked up by this kind of this trough or this cold front that came down to the south. It's going to be pushing a little bit further north. So I do feel it's going to be making landfall somewhere within the Cedar Key vicinity. And that's where they actually have the highest storm surge, is around 8 to 12 feet with this particular event. So it's not just going to be just where it's going to be making landfall. With tropical systems, we've got a lot of high winds, but unfortunately we do have a tornado aspect to this storm. So anywhere down from Tampa to St. Petersburg, up there to Gainesville, all the way through Jacksonville, even as it heads inland, heading towards Savannah, all these regions are under the gun that could see these tropical type like spin ups. And I've even seen some wording out there that some of these could be some tendency of violent in nature. So this is a huge concern with potential outbreak of tornadoes with this particular system as it continues to rapidly intensify and become a formidable hurricane. And if it does, in fact, make landfall as a major hurricane, this would be the 7th year in a row, folks, that the United States has seen a major hurricane. So let's take a look at the satellite where it is right now, right? It's down to a 977 millibar low pressure. It doesn't really have much of an eye, but notice it just now crossed out in the open waters of the Gulf of Mexico. It's clearly past Cuba now. So this is going into prime activity, prime area where it's going over those very intense warm waters. And at least, the hurricane models have still been printing out a significant rapidly development. I mean, they first hinted at this about 3 days ago, folks, and they've been consistent really all along. And the National Hurricane Center is now on board with that. And yes, I mean, there's definitely some model tendency that could actually peak up even maybe higher than 120, but it's going to be intensifying. The only thing that's going to stop it from intensifying is actually landfall, unfortunately. So it's going to be making landfall likely sometime tomorrow morning in and around near the Cedar Keys vicinity, with very intense winds. Could be packing 120 plus, and wind gust up to about 140 miles an hour with this storm. The latest hurricane guidance has it potentially dropping down to potentially a 937 millibar low pressure, down to maybe 125 130 mile per hour winds. It's got a long ways to go to get there, folks, but I do feel it gets there, as this is going to be rapidly intensifying over the next 24 hours. It's going to be bringing copious amounts of rain. So this is very concerning, not just for the wind aspect, the tornado aspect, but also the flood threat. But what's good, it actually is moving at 14 miles an hour. So I'm not expecting like catastrophic floods or anything like that with this particular system, but you could lay down some pretty intense rainfall rates in a very short amount of time that causes a lot of flash flooding, compounding onto the storm surge that at 8 to 12 feet potential. That causes drastic damage within these regions. And yes, we could be looking at 2, 3, upwards to maybe even 4-inch isolated amounts per hour rainfall rates at times. And it's not just where it makes landfall. This is going to be spreading well inland and spreading its precipitation well into portions of even Alabama on the backside, but especially into Georgia, going in there into South Carolina, feeding into North Carolina as well, before it actually heads back out in the open waters of the Atlantic. And I do feel it actually continues to remain, if not a hurricane, at least a high-end tropical storm, really the entire time. I don't think it actually loses all of its tropical characteristics. And one thing that's actually could happen, which is kind of also rare in itself, is some of the remnants could actually get caught up in what's now Franklin, right? And this likely won't be until later on this weekend. But yeah, some of the remnants could actually kind of merge together before they actually head out into the open waters. But we do have a pretty significant trough that's going to be coming in from the north, from the northeast, driving down southward. That's what's going to be pushing this storm, further south. But it actually might even push it far enough south that it just kind of hangs. So you have a piece of it that could, obviously drift off into Franklin's remnants, but then have a piece of it still hanging tough and just kind of hanging out there in the open waters of off the southeast coast, right? And so that's a probability, folks. So here's the trough, right? So this is the breakdown over the next 5 days. We've got that pretty significant dip. You're seeing some of the cooler conditions, especially further south. Even if it's normal, it just feels a lot nicer than the 105s, 110 crazy temperatures you've seen down there lately. But things are going to be returning. So the high pressure drifts off back to the west. We do have another trough that's coming in from the Pacific Northwest. That adds some coolness and some actually rains moving back in the picture for them. But this is an area that we'll have to keep an eye on still out there in the Atlantic, as I still think the remnants of Idalia just kind of hangs around for an extended period of time. Idalia is not going to go anywhere really anytime soon, I feel, because by the time we head into this weekend, it still could be a little low pressure center out there in the Atlantic, right? It still could be just kind of sitting there and just kind of sitting there. And obviously, the longer the time frame these little lows sit there out in the open waters, the more concerning there are before they, head out to sea. But this looks like some of the remnants is probably going to be picked up with Franklin, but some of the remnants is going to be drifting out, just kind of hanging there, hanging tough, and be off the southeast coast for an extended period of time. But here's your rainfall aspects for the next 5 to 7 days, folks. So what tropical systems have a tendency to do, because they just have a lot of energy associated with them, right? So they have a lot of heavy rain. You got two of them. You just got not just one, you got two of them. So it's going to take the bulk of the precipitation and kind of rob the precipitation for the rest of us, right? So you got pretty severe clear skies for a good part of the middle of the part of the country. But look at the monsoon. That's one thing that's been changed over the last 2 weeks, really, is the monsoon is finally alive, right? It's finally actually woken up down there after they went through a brutal July down there into a good part of Arizona. The second half of August hasn't actually been terribly too bad, with at least some, isolated rain showers within this regions. But all the rain, yeah, very heavy rain, flooding rains across Florida into the southeast, while much of the Pacific Northwest is coming back in the picture with some very wet times ahead. And that, I think, continues to be wet for the foreseeable future, because we do have some troughs sneaking in. One thing that's going to be coming back is, unfortunately, is the ridge of high pressure, that heat dome that's been baking much of the country. At least the middle of the country is going to be coming back. And one thing that's going to be evident, it's actually going to be lifting further north. So places like into Minneapolis and things are going to be well into the upper 90s heading into the first week of September, while much of the West is on the cooler, kind of wetter side. And it's still hot down further south. It's definitely still hot, but you're not talking like the 105s, 110 plus range. At least you could say that. So yeah, there's the setup for on Sunday, right? Here's the surface map. There's the low pressure. So you've got the just a little low pressure hanging off the coast. It's still, with this high pressure draped across a good part of the country, it's, again, you got a lot of sinking air. It's not going to be raining underneath that. So only area where it's able to rain is these eastern type of tropical type funnel systems pulling in this monsoonal flow within these regions, and that actually sneaks up in a good part of Utah and even headed up into Idaho there. But there's your kind of sneak peek early look at Labor Day, right? So I do feel it's going to be intensifying. The heat continues to build across the middle of the country. We are going to September, so we are losing the sun angle. We lose daytime almost on a daily basis. So these temperatures likely won't be the crazy stuff, the 110 type stuff, but still hot, right? I mean, you're still in the triple digits. You're still into much of the triple digits across the middle of the country. But look what happens, right? 99 in Minneapolis, even spreading into the upper 90s up there all the way to the Canadian border. So it's pretty intense stuff the further north you go, even well above average temperature anomalies. But even much of the southeast and much of the Ohio Valley and into the northeast, plenty warm for Labor Day standards. But what happens beyond that is that ridge, and it's still holding strong across the south. So even though you won't get the intense stuff, you're still well above average. I mean, you're still well above average across a good part of the regions. But what's going to probably happen by the time we head into this time next week is we're going to have these kind of the conveyor belts of storms are going to be coming just on the northern periphery of the ridge, right? So you got the Ridge Rider type aspect storms coming back into play, and you'll have these vorticities that kind of trail across the northern branch of that, and that will be laying down some damaging winds, some heavier rains, and these squall-like types thunderstorms will be traversing across the northern tier of the Pacific Northwest and much of the northern central states, while much of the south, unfortunately, continues to remain on the drier side and the well above average side as well. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video, definitely hit the subscribe button, and catch me next update where I protect you for and after the storm.